There comes a moment when the narcissist realizes they've lost the very thing they thought they'd control forever, or you. Not just your presence, but your mind, your peace, your attention, your power. They played games, manipulated you, made you question your worth, your sanity, your truth. But now, the tables have turned. They feel it in your silence. They see it in your calm. They sense it in your distance. You no longer react. You no longer chase. You're not trapped in their cycle anymore. That's when the narcissist realizes you've won. You're no longer living for their validation. You're no longer addicted to the highs and lows they created. You found your worth within. They wanted you broken, but you came back rebuilt. They can't gaslight someone who now trusts their own reality. They can't control someone who's no longer afraid to walk away. They can't feed off someone who's healed the wounds they once exploited. You're not playing their game anymore because you made your own rules. They underestimated your strength, your growth, your healing, and now they sit with the reality that the supply is gone. The attention is gone. The attention is gone. The chaos is gone. But most of all, you are gone. You've outgrown the trauma. You've silenced the noise. You've taken your power back. You've won. Silence isn't just the absence of words. It's the presence of strength. When you stop reacting to a narcissist, you take away their control. They rely on your emotions to fuel their manipulation. Every argument, every tear, every desperate plea you once gave them was like oxygen to their ego. They wanted a reaction, not because they cared, but because your pain made them feel powerful. But now, you're silent. You don't explain. You don't defend. You don't justify your peace. And that silence, it's louder than any scream you ever gave them. You've realized that not everything deserves your energy. You've learned that your response is a currency, and you've stopped spending it on someone who only used it against you. They try to provoke, to bait you, to confuse you, but nothing works anymore. You've stepped back from the chaos and let your silence speak your worth. It tells them, I no longer need you. I no longer fear you. I no longer belong to your story. And that silence, it drives them insane. It drives them insane. Because for the first time, they're not in control. You are. Emotional detachment is the moment everything changes. When you were caught in the narcissist web, your emotions were constantly hijacked. One moment you were high on their praise. The next you were drowning in confusion, fear, or guilt. You lived in a cycle, always hoping for validation, always fearing abandonment, always trying to please someone who never wanted to be truly pleased. And it's not love. It's emotional captivity, detachment. That's liberation. It means you no longer seek their approval. You no longer internalize their insults or chase their compliments. You no longer need to fix what they constantly tried to break inside you. You begin to see their behavior for what it really is. Projection, manipulation, and deep insecurity, not a reflection of your value. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you finally control what you feel when you feel it. And who gets access to your emotional energy? You can still observe the narcissist behavior, but now it doesn't shake you. Their disapproval doesn't wound you. Their silence doesn't scare you. Their chaos no longer pulls you back into the cycle. You've unhooked yourself from their emotional chain, where once they played you like a puppet, now the strings are cut. You've taken back your emotional sovereignty. One of the most powerful moments in your healing journey is when you finally reclaim your self-worth. For so long, the narcissist made you believe that your value depended on them, on their approval, their attention, their moods. You were taught to believe that you were only enough when they said so. They dangled love like a reward and used rejection as punishment. Slowly, without even realizing it, you began to measure your worth through their lens. A distorted, toxic lens designed to keep you small, insecure, and dependent. But then something changed. Maybe it was a breaking point. Maybe it was a quiet awakening. Either way, you began to see that their validation was never real. It was a weapon. And that's when you started looking inward. You stopped asking, what's wrong with me? And started asking, why do I allow someone to treat me this way? You started remembering your voice, your dreams, your identity, the one that existed long before they tried to erase it. You began to rebuild your confidence, not with borrowed opinions, but with truth. You reconnected with the parts of yourself that they tried to shame. Your sensitivity, your boundaries, your needs. You stopped apologizing for being who you are. You no longer depend on them or anyone else to feel whole. You validate yourself now. You see your own light. You understand that your worth was never lost. It was just buried under years of manipulation and self-doubt. And when the narcissist senses that shift, that you no longer look to them to tell you who you are, it terrifies them. Because now you've become something they can't control, someone who knows their worth. To a narcissist, you were never just a partner, friend, or family member. You were a source of attention, validation, admiration, even pain. They fed off your emotional responses like fuel. Whether you were praising them, arguing with them, begging for clarity, or crying from confusion, it all served the same purpose, keeping you emotionally invested so they stayed in control. Every reaction you gave, good or bad, was supply. When you defended yourself, they felt powerful. When you tried to explain yourself, they felt important. When you begged for closeness, they felt desired. They didn't care about resolution. They cared about dominance. Your attention was their addiction. But now something has changed. You stopped feeding the machine. You stopped reacting, explaining, and trying. You stopped being predictable. You stopped responding to their guilt trips, silent treatments, and sudden love bombing. They throw bait, and you don't bite, and you don't bite. You've emotionally unplugged from the game. And without supply, the narcissist begins to wither. They're like a performer with no audience, lost, irrelevant, and exposed. Their mask starts to slip because there's no energy left to sustain it. The absence of your attention reveals just how dependent they were on your presence. The silence becomes suffocating. For them, you've cut off their emotional oxygen. And without your supply, they're forced to face something they desperately avoid: their own emptiness. Narcissistic manipulation thrives in confusion, insecurity, and emotional wounds. That's how they kept you under control, by targeting your fears, your need to feel loved, your past traumas, and your desire to keep peace. They twisted your words, flipped your reality, and made you question your sanity. They conditioned you to doubt yourself so that their voice always became louder than your own. But healing changes the entire equation. When you begin to heal, you no longer operate from wounds. They can't poke at your pain to get a reaction. You recognize the tactics, the gaslighting, the guilt trips, the sudden charm followed by cold withdrawal, where once you second-guessed yourself. Now you see clearly. You no longer fall for the same cycles because you've studied them, named them, and most importantly, you've outgrown them. Healing gives you emotional clarity. It sharpens your boundaries. It reminds you that you're not crazy for having feelings. It teaches you that your worth is not determined by how well you can endure mistreatment. Now, when they try to manipulate you, it doesn't land. They try to provoke shame, and you respond with self-respect. They try to stir up fear, and you meet it with certainty. They try to drag you back in, and you simply don't move. You've built a version of yourself that can't be gaslighted because you trust your perception now. You've strengthened your emotional foundation so deeply that their chaos no longer shakes your center. Manipulation only works when the target is unaware or unsure, but your healing made you aware. It made you sure. And that's what makes you untouchable. For so long, the narcissist wore a mask, one they crafted carefully to gain your trust, admiration, and emotional dependence. In the beginning, they may have seemed charming, loving, even perfect. They mirrored your dreams, your values, your emotions to make you feel seen and understood. That wasn't love. It was strategy, a calculated performance designed to lure you in. But the mask always cracks. Eventually, their true nature began to show: subtle insults disguised as jokes, manipulative guilt dressed up as concern, cold silences to punish your honesty. Yet each time you questioned the inconsistencies, they gaslit you. They made you feel like the problem. And for a while, you believed it because the illusion was powerful and you wanted to believe in the version of them they first presented. But then came the shift. Somewhere along the journey, a moment of clarity shattered the illusion. It might have been a repeated pattern, a lie exposed, or the realization that you were constantly drained, confused, and walking on eggshells. You saw through their facade. You realized the charm wasn't love. It was manipulation. The concern wasn't care. It was control. And the love they offered wasn't real. It was conditional. Once the illusion breaks, everything changes. You stop romanticizing the good moments because you see how they were weaponized to keep you hooked. You stop chasing their approval because you recognize it was always a tool to maintain power. You stop doubting your perception because you now trust the truth. They weren't who they pretended to be. Now, when you look at them, you no longer see the person they wanted you to see. You see the pattern. You see the manipulation. See the emptiness behind the mask. Boundaries were once foreign to you, not because you were weak, but because the narcissist conditioned you to believe that saying no was selfish, that having needs was a burden, and that standing up for yourself would lead to abandonment or punishment. Every time you tried to assert yourself, they would twist it, guilt you, or escalate the conflict until you gave in. Now, over time, you learned to stay silent, to shrink, to tolerate, just to keep the peace. But that was then. Now, you've drawn the line. Boundaries are no longer about pushing people away. They're about protecting what you've rebuilt. Your peace, your clarity, your self-worth. You no longer allow late-night texts to pull you back in. You don't respond to emotional bait. You don't engage in circular conversations that leave you drained. You've stopped defending your choices to someone who never had your best interests at heart. You're no longer afraid of what happens if they get angry or walk away, because now you've made peace with walking away first. You understand that love doesn't mean losing yourself. That real connection doesn't require erasing your needs or ignoring red flags. You've learned to identify manipulation disguised as closeness and chaos disguised as passion. Your boundaries are clear now and unshakable. Not because you want to hurt them, but because you finally love yourself enough to say, this is the line. You don't get to cross it anymore. They can try the same old tactics, guilt, charm, rage, victimhood, but nothing works like it used to. Because boundaries backed by healing, self-respect, and experience are walls they can no longer climb. And that terrifies them. In the narcissist world, people are not seen as individuals with feelings, needs, and boundaries. They're seen as tools. Replaceable, recyclable, and useful only when they serve a purpose. That's why when they discard you, or even when you finally gather the strength to leave, they don't take it seriously. They believe they can come back whenever they want, that you'll always be waiting, that their grip on your emotions is forever. But this time, it's different, because this isn't just a break. This isn't another phase in their twisted push-pull cycle. This is the end. And they know it. They sense it when you don't respond, when you don't flinch at their games, when the emotional door that used to swing wide open now stays shut. They feel the difference, not in your words, but in your energy. You've changed, you've healed, you've detached. You're no longer fighting to make it work or hoping they'll change. You're no longer emotionally available to a person who once fed off your pain. You've accepted the truth that you were never loved for who you are, but for how much you tolerated. And that truth has set you free. The narcissist begins to realize that the version of you they once controlled is gone and not coming back. You're no longer emotionally accessible. You're no longer stuck in the cycle. They've lost not only your presence, but your attention, your forgiveness, your emotional labor. You were their comfort zone, their emotional sponge, their reliable fallback, and now you're a closed chapter. Chapter they can no longer reopen, no matter how many times they reappear with apologies, nostalgia, or new masks. Because this time they didn't just lose you temporarily, they lost you completely. And that's the truth that burns them the most. You didn't just survive them, you outgrew them. You outgrew them. You healed what they hoped would stay broken. You became everything they tried to convince you you'd never be without them. Whole. They lost the one person who gave them chance after chance, grace after grace, love after betrayal, and they'll never find that again. But you found yourself. And the greatest revenge wasn't anger. It wasn't retaliation. It was silence. It was peace. It was living free, unapologetically, powerfully, and healed. So let them realize it. Let them sit with the silence they created. Let them feel the emptiness they once projected onto you, because now they know you've won and you're never looking back.